What's an invention that quietly changed the world but doesn't get enough credit?
Story 1. Washing machines. Economists have argued that its impact is similar to that of the internet. Washing clothes by hand takes a long time. Washing machines made it much easier for more women to enter the workforce. Answer: I swear by the dryer. Washing machine is a no-brainer, but many people in my country still like to dry their clothes by hanging after taking it out from the wash. I know some clothes need to drip dry and iron straight like work shirts and pants, but home clothes, don't worry about it. I have fond memories of staying in Melbourne in a dorm and spending about 15 minutes total for laundry. Step 1. Chuck all dirties into washer, detergent, and set the cycle. Step 2. Game study for 1 hour. Step 3. Stuff all washer clothes into dryer and start the cycle. Step 4. Pick it up hours later whenever the whim hits me and loosely stuff then into their designated compartments. My wife would cuss something fierce if she saw me living like that, though. Story 2. The axle. The wheel gets all the credit, but the axle makes the wheel useful. Pottery wheel, millstone, transporting stuff. They were invented at the same time, it is said. Story 3. Glassware. Think about how valuable a chemically inert, see-through, and heat-resistant set of glassware is when it comes to chemistry. Story 4. Lenses. Just squish a ball of glass and whoa, whole new worlds from the very small to the very large are visible. Story 5. 3-point seatbelt. Saved over 1 million lives. People use one every day without even thinking. So important the inventor created it and then said, "Here you go, world. All yours." Story 6. Remember the ozone layer hole crisis? Do you notice how nobody really talks about it anymore? That's because we, the human species, collectively decided to stop using CFCs in aerosols and other applications. These chemicals were causing the ozone layer to deteriorate and allow harmful UV radiation from the sun to reach the surface of our planet. Stopping the mass use of CFCs has stopped the deterioration of the ozone layer entirely, and it is expected to be fully healed by 2060. In my opinion, the fact that we, for once, all agreed on something, implemented a solution, and now see that one of the biggest threats to our planet is non-existent is an amazing achievement. Answer: it's still a threat to people who live in New Zealand, Australia, and other countries affected by the Antarctic ozone hole. It's great that people finally decided to stop using chemicals that depleted the layer, but we still have to deal with being sunburned too easily, higher levels of melanoma and other skin cancers. I was surprised the first time I went to Europe and it not being such an issue if I forgot to put sunscreen on. In New Zealand during spring and summer, just going outside can result in sunburn even on a cloudy day. Story 7. I had my 95-year-old grandmother join a call with my work once to discuss technology and strategy. Obviously, the individuals at the firm were well-versed in things that felt like magic to her, but they were able to ask a similar question about what tech in her lifetime changed her life the most. She said vulcanized tires. As a young woman, she had the means to go places and no longer worry about getting home from them without fear. She could get a job a few towns away and support her family. Prior to that, you needed to travel with someone knowledgeable and strong enough to deal with the tires when they popped, not just if. I don't think reliable tires get the hype they deserve. When was the last time you actually considered what your tires do for you? Meanwhile, how different would our lives be if they didn't work as reliably as they do? Answer: when I was in middle school, my history teacher's father died. He took a few days off for bereavement, and when he came back, we didn't have a regular class. He just told us stories about him. This was 2008 or 9, and his dad was well into his 90s. He told us that they had a conversation one time about the greatest advancement in technology he saw in his lifetime. And he didn't say TV or computers or the internet or actually anything electronic. He said penicillin, because when he was a kid, you could die from something as little as a cold, and antibiotics changed all of that. Story 8. Blue LEDs. If you don't know the story, it's fascinating. Look it up. They even did a documentary on it. Story 9. Surprised, no one said artificial fertilizer yet. Without it, would have a hell of a hard time sustaining 4 billion people on this planet, let alone the 8 we are now. That and penicillin, something we take so much for granted, we're creating superbugs due to our overuse of it. Story 10. The tractor tire. When motorized tractors were first created, they had hard, cog-like wheels to allow for traction in the soft soil. As a result, they were slow and uncomfortable to drive, allowing a farmer to plow an acre in 2 to 3 hours, which wasn't much faster than a horse or ox-drawn plow. In the 1930s, the low-pressure pneumatic tire was developed, which allowed farmers to comfortably operate their tractors at much higher speeds. Modern tractors can plow 40 to 80 acres a day, making food production dramatically easier and more efficient. Story 11. Given the last few years, vaccines sure don't get the respect they deserve. Amoxicillin was quite the game changer. Pasteurized dairy was a pretty big deal. Story 12. The ballpoint pen made handwriting much easier, less messy, and more convenient for everyone. And now the spent plastic shells of billions of them fill up landfills everywhere. Edit. Removed remark about it being space-age technology, because it predates that, as U First Report 6445 pointed out. Story 13. The needle. A mate told me this years ago, because it enabled people to stitch skins together, make clothes, and stay warm. Answer. Not only clothes, but allowed us to make bags. We were now able to carry things across long distances without the burden of carrying it in our arms. We could load up pack animals with bags. We could carry food and water in canteens and sacks, allowing us to travel long distances. It allowed us to make simple shelters like tents. In short, the needle and thread allowed us to become nomadic. I would even theorize that without that invention, we would still be in a few countries in Africa doing whatever. You see drawings of man walking out of Africa in the Great Migration depictions, with us almost always naked. But I would wager we were fully clothed when we finally moved thanks to the needle and thread. Story 14. The Linux kernel is, I believe, the closest thing we have to a modern-day world wonder, and people don't give it enough credit because it's not a really big building or a robot or something. Literally, the whole world runs on this remarkable feat of the hive mind of human engineering, basically inventing human code collaboration to make it even feasible to achieve this. Answer. Also, it's a miracle that Linus and the rest of the key people keep a giant project with thousands of regular contributors from many different unaffiliated organizations, creating a lot of changes each update cycle, humming, mostly frictionless, and have so for 30 years. I'm kind of worried what happens when the current generation of graybeards, including Linus, retires. Most of the key people are in roughly the same age bracket. Story 15. Let's give it up for the zipper, folks. This little genius turned pants from oops to oops, I did it again. It deserves a standing ovation for keeping our fashion faux pas in check. Story 16. Gravity flush toilets. Our earliest physical evidence comes from 2800 BC in the Indus Valley. A more sophisticated system was set up in Crete by the Minoans. It included a full pipe system. Rome was famously well built with spas, public toilets, and gravity-driven aqueducts that traveled for hundreds of kilometers. People can't live together and shoot. Every city, every urban community exists because of toilets. We'd be still scattered on farms without our glorious shitter. Story 17. Vaccines. A whole hell of a lot of you reading this right now are alive because vaccines were invented generations before you were born. Story 18. Vaccines. They did their job so well that now there are dipshits who think they are bad and are trying to remove access. Somehow they've just become baseline, and everyone forgot how critical they are to drastically extending the average lifespan. Story 19. The written word. Without it, you have very little capacity for advancement, and your history and culture is very susceptible to loss. Story 20. Building codes, supremely boring to most of us, yet has saved more lives than almost any other invention. Story 21. Everybody is talking about modern inventions. The most important invention is fire, or at least the ability to harness and control fire. More of a discovery than an invention. But the ability to cook meat forever altered human development. Cooked meat is far more digestible, giving us a superior form of protein, which played a significant role in the development of our brain. Story 22. Aseptic packaging. Being able to produce food en masse that doesn't spoil at room temperature changed food security and transportation. Story 23. The J-trap. It was the perfect, low-tech solution after hundreds of years of complicated toilet mechanisms. Highly underrated in my opinion. Story 24. Tampons, pads, and menstrual cups. Of course we've been sticking things in our pants for millennia, but the belt and strap getup your grandmother had to deal with was a ridiculous pain to wear compared to what's available now. Story 25. The ability to copy and paste. I wonder how many labor hours of tedious typing has been saved over the decades due to this. Story 26. TV and air conditioning central heating. It completely changed the way societies interact with someone as basic as the neighbor, especially in first world countries. Story 27. Boats. Transportation is so normalized today, and boats are somewhat inefficient by today's standards, so they don't get any respect. Story 28. The cam. Who came up with the idea of a non-round wheel doing extraordinary work was a freaking genius. Story 29. The refrigerator freezer. And if you want something more obscure, frozen dough for bread. My father told me about how much a farmer's wife's life changed when she did not need to get up early enough to make bread from scratch to feed all the farmhands. The process to make bread is time-consuming, and if you need to feed 20 farmhands at 8 a.m., you have to get up really early. Imaging that and having a bunch of children who will be free labor later. Story 30. Eli Whitney's milling machine. This one wins for me because replaceable parts and precise machining are the cornerstones of most produced goods today. In its absence, most individuals would quickly realize that we aren't capable of reproducing anything we commonly use without lifetimes of training. Example, I watched this bow maker and realized without precision machining, it would take months or years for an individual to produce something as simple as a bow and arrows. Now factor in cars, computing, agriculture, etc. Nothing in the modern world is possible without it. Story 31. Alternating current electricity. Thank you, Nikola Tesla, for that and the initial work and inspiration for so many more things we know today. Story 32. Blood pressure medications. Seriously, we would not be in our current end-stage democracy without them. They have allowed people to live 20 years past their efforts. They can just sit in lazy boys for decades, sopping up even more resources because of them. Forget Tylenol. Ban blood pressure meds. The new mantra, take a walk or die fat. Your choice. Story 33. Detonators, in the most abstract sense, something that causes a small explosion, spark, to set off a larger one. If these did not exist, we would not have modern explosives. Alfred Nobel's early explosives designs relied on these, for example. And warfare, and indeed global history, would look very different indeed. Indeed, this same principle underlies how the nukes dropped on Japan worked. Story 34. Visa and the interbank exchange supercharged national and international finance, as well as consumer lending. In the 1950s, if you wanted to buy a larger ticket item that wasn't on layaway, your banker would underwrite the specific loan. The network paved the way for more competition in banking, and ultimately, national banking, which supercharged growth and has its own problems and downsides. The history of Visa going bank to the initial Bank Americard is very fascinating. Story 35. Pneumatic nail guns, and honestly just pneumatic power in general, single-handedly made everything in construction twice, if not thrice as fast and more powerful. Story 36. Showers. So many people take it for granted. There are so many people in the world who would do anything to take a nice, clean, hot shower. Story 37. YouTube enables the average person to repair many items that otherwise would have been thrown away or necessitate hiring a professional. Story 38. The existence of elevators unlocked a whole new kind of human habitation and existence. We were more or less always able to build very, very tall things, or at least things taller than was desirable for a habitation you'd have to walk all the way up and down every day. But the existence of elevators immediately enabled us to go as high as engineering was capable of making a building. Story 39. The washing machine. We are unaware of the amount of time and effort that was required to wash clothes. Story 40. Contraceptive pills. They gave women control over their own bodies and lives. Birth control pills made it possible to plan families, pursue education, build careers, and reduce unplanned pregnancies. That freedom and independence has completely reshaped society forever. Story 41. The Haber process. This was the process for creating ammonia on an industrial level. Once ammonia was able to be easily produced, it jump-started the entire chemical industry, since so many important chemicals that we use require ammonia during their creation, the production of fertilizer, and explosives. Story 42. Penicillin. It's almost never talked about in school and such as far as I know, yet it's literally the base for most modern medicine and caused passing rates from diseases to go down dramatically. Story 43. The shipping container made global logistics and our global economy possible. You can load one in Krakow, Poland, and unload the same one in Shanghai. Compatibility was universal, with all trucks, trains, ships, and cranes in between. Before that, loads were dropped on the dock and lifted into the ship item by item, sometimes by hand. The shipping container was so successful and useful that it spawned an entire new generation and class of ships specifically designed to carry it. Pretty much everything you buy has probably moved in one. Story 44. Vaccines. Smallpox vaccine has probably saved tens of millions, if not more, considering how much that disease eliminated until the 20th century. Story 45. I'd say the debit card POS system. Considering how widespread its usage is, not much fanfare was utilized in its creation. Story 46. Micrometer. Led to modern precision tools, standardization of manufacturing, especially screws, nuts, and bolts. Story 47. Written language. The ability to pass information to each other has created a multi-generational collaboration that has advanced us so to where we are today. Story 48. Glass. Not stuff like fancy chandeliers, but functional glass like windows, drinking glasses, and all the medical equipment. Story 49. Air conditioning. Freezers. There is a great show called How We Got to Now that goes over a lot of inventions like this, things like glass and data maps. We don't think about them, but our world would be unrecognizable without them. Story 50. Plastics. Despite the issue of pollution, plastics and other artificial polymers have changed how human society functions in the last 100 years or so. Almost everything around you has plastic in some form. Story 51. Sulfa. Substances antibiotics. My father, greatest gen, considered it the greatest invention of his lifetime, given that people used to routinely die from infection. Now we take it for granted and abuse the shoot out of something that truly was a miracle. Story 52. Birth control. Be it hormonal, condoms, take your pick. Birth control is one of the keys to a functional society. Story 53. Not really an invention in the conventional sense, but the more relax. Affordable post-secondary institutions designed to cater to traditional college courses, as well as agriculture and STEM-focused curriculum. Also responsible for the creation of colleges and universities designed to cater specifically to black students in Jim Crow South, where they were not allowed to attend public schools with white students. Funded by the sale of Indian land and also redistributed some of the profit from the sale back to the tribes as cash. Land-grant institutions took higher education out of the hands exclusively of the elite and led to millions of Americans being lifted from poverty, building the American middle class, and created the building blocks for the U.S. to become the economic and military superpower it is today. If you have a degree from a land-grant university today or are currently studying at one, you owe a debt of gratitude to Justin Morrill. Story 54. Containerized shipping. It drastically reduced the cost and time necessary to ship goods, both inter and intrastate, and basically upended the global economy for physical goods. Story 55. Haber-Bosch process, which is used to create crop fertilizer. It's estimated that half of the entire world population owes its existence to it. Story 56. The blue LED light. Without it, we wouldn't have white LEDs. Its inventors won the 2014 Nobel Prize for their work. Story 57. I was going to say glasses, because approximately 70% of the world wears them, but I'm reminded of the time that I asked this to my friends in public, and an old man helpfully chimed in and said, adult content, because it reduced the need for people to go to brothels and intimacy shows, and thus made people more efficient and less riddled with STDs. He then proceeded to list a few actresses he was grateful for. I'd call him a pervert, but half our group were taking notes. Story 58. The electric telegraph was far more impactful than the internet. It got plenty of credit at the time, but is now almost forgotten. It changed the latency of transatlantic communications from weeks to minutes. The telegraph even spawned a social network among the operators. Fascinating story. Story 59. Optical fibers. It's literally just thin wires of glass, but our modern society is completely dependent on the data transmission speeds they enable. Story 60. This is a really good post, and I'm going to be tracking it for your responses. I'm very impressed that others are thinking about these things out there. That matters a huge lot to scientists. Not just me. I'm thinking tons and tons of them, like Nikola Tesla's of this world, who develop amazing things and then pass away, penniless. Since I have background in biology and medicine, amongst several others in engineering and sciences, I would have a real hard time picking one over the other after some thought. I would say two inventions rank for me above the others, not to devalue many others that have an equal importance. 1. Face mask, Dr. Wu Liente. Gloves, Dr. William S. Halstead and his head nurse, later his wife Caroline Hampton. 2. Anesthesia, Humphrey Davy. Yes, the genius himself. Ancient civilizations. William Morton, Mass General, right here in Boston. 3. AC current, Nikola Tesla. Basically, electrification of the great world. Shall we say anything more? P.S. After some thinking, I have to add Archimedes' one singular invention that has greatest impact on our lives today. Archimedes, the ubiquitous screw. Shall I say anything more important in our life than that? I mean, literally everything is put together or propelled by screw, and there is probably no one in the history of mankind more important who could have invented it except Archimedes. He was basically a genius. Story 61. Paper. China was mass-producing cheap, pulp-based paper over 1,000 years before the Western world, who were still using animal skins for vellum or parchment. Story 62. Blender. Before, stirring and mixing food was time-consuming, tiring, and in some cases, difficult. For example, in the manufacture of butter. Story 63. The invention of the spring. Be it in a cigarette lighter, to the suspension of an automobile, to manufacturing and machines that repeatedly do the same movement thanks to the spring. Story 64. Discovery of new continents by sailors. The wheel gets credit. Electricity gets credit. Steam engine gets credit. Aeroplane gets credit. Sailors have never received credit. Without them, the world would not be integrated. Story 65. The bag. People take them for granted, but if it weren't for the invention concept of the bag, we'd still all be living like animals. Story 66. Hydraulics. How else would we be able to lift heavy loads, cut through steel, bend steel, lift bridges, etc.? Story 67. 1. The shipping container, 1956, Malcolm McLean. Standardized metal boxes revolutionized global trade, slashed shipping costs, and made globalization possible. Yet most people never think about it. 2. The transistor, 1947, Bell Labs. Without it, no computers, phones, or modern electronics. Everyone praises the computer, but the tiny transistor is the real hero. 3. The printing press screw mechanism, not just Gutenberg's press. The screw design adapted from wine presses was the real game changer that enabled mass printing and literacy. 4. The sewage system, ancient, modern versions. Public health improved more from sanitation than from medicine for centuries. Saved millions of lives, rarely gets recognition. 5. The QR code, 1994, Masahiro Hara. Once overlooked, now it runs payments, logistics, tickets, and even COVID tracking. The genius is in its simplicity. Story 68. Adult content. Adult content drives technology. It was a big part of the reason that home movie projectors became popular and better. Later, it drove the popularity of Polaroid cameras that didn't need to be developed by professionals. Then it was VCRs, then DVDs, then Blu-ray. Then it was what really pushed internet usage. The easier it becomes for people to discreetly watch adult content, the better the technology that facilitates that becomes. Story 69. Reforestation. Without it, most of Europe would have been without forests somewhere around 1800. Also, the modern-day science into growing healthier forests and more stable ecosystems. We are learning slowly how to recreate parts of nature we have been cultivating for the last few thousand years, even though most damage happened more recently. Story 70. Most of these comments are things that are pretty widely acknowledged, so I'm going to say sewing machine. Story 71. The evolution of microchips and transistors. I don't think we realize how blessed we are to be able to have supercomputers in our pockets every single day. Story 72. Backup cameras, blind spot sensors, save thousands of dollars every day for everyone. We take it for granted now. Story 73. I'm an electrician. LED lights are hands down one of the most incredible and impactful inventions of the last 50 years. They are so efficient, so multi-purpose, and so cheap. They draw such low amperage, we don't really have to count lights on residential circuits anymore, basically. They're lightweight, they're cheap, They can be dimmed with electrical signals. They can have programmable drivers. They're insanely bright. They can be color changed. They've probably done more for reducing electricity consumption in the last 2 decades than any form of public habit changes. Story 74. The type of ice cream scoop with a little mechanical lever to unstick the ice cream. Millions of children have been served by this innovation. Story 75. Glass. It's so normalized as a material, folks don't realize that all modern technology has relied on it, or that there's a multitude of different types of glass. Specifically, borosilicate and fused quartz have been the most important and came about in the last 150 years. We had the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Steel Age, and while folks are quick to call this the Information Digital Age, if we continued with the most important material for naming, this would be the Glass Age. Story 76. Synthetic nitrogen, specifically the Haber-Bosch process, important for the large-scale synthesis of fertilizers and explosives. It is estimated that 1/3 of annual global food production uses ammonia from the Haber-Bosch process, and that this supports nearly half of the world's population. Without it, we could not have scaled food supplies to support our population. Story 77. AC electricity. It was a big deal just before the 20th century during the current wars. Edison raged against it, the dangers, the alga's inefficiency, the fact that his DC was already the standard. He even went so far as to perform public executions on animals. He obviously lost, but the modern world couldn't operate if DC was the power standard. Not for things, but for generation and transmission. Story 78. Linen flax, hay, 3-field crop rotation, Arabic numerals, double-entry bookkeeping, chronometer, compass. Story 79. Fabric, woven, knit, etc. We use to carry things, to survive in extreme temperatures, to build shelter, etc. It's so mundane that we never think of it as an invention. But when you look into all the steps required to make modern fabric, it's remarkable. Story 80. Indoor plumbing. We have drinkable, potable water immediately available to us from the comfort of our homes. We have toilets and showers and are cleaner as a species than we have ever been. Imagine having to work the fields all day and not being able to shower afterwards. Story 81. The sewer system generally, but the S-bend and related P-trap, in plumbing in particular. A toilet will take your waste, but once beyond the water barrier, smelly and dangerous gases from the sewer cannot come back. See also the BBC podcast, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy. Story 82. Closed sewers. Not sexy, never mentioned, but imagine a big city without them. Unless you live in a big city without them, you have my condolences. Story 83. Antibiotics. Sure, they get loads of credit, but IMO, we could have a monthly global holiday for antibiotic worship and contemplation, and it still wouldn't be enough. Story 84. I asked my nearly 100-year-old grandmother once this exact question, and she said it was the ballpoint pen. They couldn't get over that they could just carry a pen around without an inkwell, and she said it was more life-changing than anything else she ever saw. Story 85. I'll do. 5. Cheap consumer printers, video games, bicycles, hot air balloons, i.e., transportation by air, shoelaces. Story 86. Face creams and moisturizers. Even 40 years ago, teenagers in high school looked like middle-aged insurance salesmen. Obviously, the copious amount of tobacco smoke in the air didn't help either. Story 87. Eyeglasses. They help individuals live better lives and dramatically impact personal productivity by 22 for very low cost. For a recent example, older workers earn 33 more when given reading glasses. Story 88. Variable potentiometers, resistors. This enabled radio transmissions, which allowed for wireless data transmission, radio, TV, satellites. Story 89. Oven chips fries. Before cooking your chips fries in the oven became the norm, you'd have been deep frying them. So many house fires at the time were caused by people cooking chips fries after coming home from the pub and then falling asleep, leaving the boiling oil on the stove. Story 90. My guess is that the invention of a walking stick allowed our ancestors to walk upright and change the world. Story 91. The shipping container, it revolutionized global trade by standardizing cargo transport, slashing costs, and making globalization feasible. Yet most people barely think about it when considering world-changing inventions. Story 92. The guys who figured out how to make blue light LEDs with gallium nitride. The change this made enabled us to make LED lighting, new screen technology, and loads more. Shuji Nakamura, Isamu Akasaki, and Hiroshi Amano take a bow. Story 93. Washing machine, a multi-day chore. If you had a large family, lots of kids, gets reduced down to 1 day or less. Absolute game changer. Story 94. Cotton, washable, cloth and soap. It cut infant mortality way, way down. Yeah, just soap, water, basic hygiene. Story 95. The chicken. It was invented by breeding and domestication. It fed a hell of a lot of people. Nobody appreciates it. Story 96. The spinning wheel. Although it was invented in the 900s and spread throughout the old world in a couple of 100 years, it's one of those inventions you don't realize how revolutionary it was until you try to do a hand spindle. I've done both. With a hand spindle, it takes months to get any decent amount of thread for me. With a spinning wheel, it's a couple of days. While today, spinning wheels are electronic to make fabric. The principle of the ancient spinning wheel is still there. Story 97. Multi-core computer processors. Everything computing today, good and bad, are descendants of this change. Everything we use today that has a computer chip connects to servers with processors that have hundreds of cores in them in data centers with thousands of processors. Without them, our digital lives would not be near as possible as it is today. Story 98. Are we including awful inventions in this, like things which had a major and quick negative impact that is under-discussed? Story 99. The answer is not what you'd think of. The plow, or an American plow. This invention allowed farmers to grow more crops than they could consume, eventually leading to non-agrarian differentiation, millers, bakers, shopkeepers, etc. This formed the foundation for civilization as we know it today. Story 100. Modern plumbing. It has probably saved more lives indirectly through disease mitigation than any particular medical advancement in history. Story 101. The steel plow allowed farmers to feed more dash, leaving others to specialize in other things to a greater degree than ever. Story 102. More like a set of inventions, but cloud computing as a whole. It is extremely hard to explain how big of a change it is, from companies owning their own servers to paying AWS or Azure to host it. But for anyone outside the tech space, all they see is that a lot of data centers are being built, and somehow Amazon is involved. Story 103. The scientific method and peer review. It is the backbone of all progress since the Renaissance. It's sadly being usurped by idiots who think a 1-foot level can measure the curvature of the earth and that Tylenol causes autism. Story 104. Everyone gives all the credit to the wheel that should go to the axle. The wheel's obvious. It's the axle that was the breakthrough. Story 105. Charcoal. Reliable, portable, relatively lightweight fuel was a game changer in early history. Much of our technological development since has been fueled by, pun intended, better ways to store, transport, and utilize energy. And charcoal was the first step in this process. Story 106. The Haber-Bosch process for turning nitrogen and hydrogen into ammonia. There would not be 8 billion people on the planet without it. However, negative points for Fritz Haber being an important cog in the Nazi machine, as his process was also used for making explosive ordnance, and he was one of the primary inventors of Zyklon B, the tool used to exterminate people in German concentration camps. Story 107. John Browning's telescoping barrel pistol slide. John Browning almost single-handedly invented the modern firearm, but the M1911 and the perfection of the semi-automatic pistol that went with it was an absolute game-changer. You had a reliable, powerful, durable backup weapon when things hit the fan and you had no other option. Multiple MOH and other awards were bestowed upon servicemen who used their M1911s to devastating effect. Looking beyond the M1911, Browning's telescoping barrel pistol slide laid the foundation for nearly every semi-automatic pistol built today. Browning's designs are so ubiquitous that you'd have to actively look for a firearm that doesn't have his fingerprints on it in one way or another. Story 108. Gang plates. They are used to make wood trusses, connecting pieces of varying lengths to form spans that work to redistribute weight, making interior walls non-load-bearing. Totally changed how housing is built. Story 109. PICs. 1/3 of world population is going to abandon dollar already and starting doing commerce with their own currency. Story 110. The electric motor. 50% of energy in the U.S. is used for driving electric motors, and most of that is generated using the same device in reverse. Story 111. What about soap? To clean the body primarily, but how that might have led to all the different kinds of soaps that we use today. Story 112. Agriculture. Domestication of plants and animals. Taken for granted now, but our civilization is built on that, and without it, we would still be small bands of hunter-gatherers. Story 113. Twine. Even though it is mostly missing from the archaeological record, the invention of twine made civilization possible. It meant we could make bows, slings, clothes, fish nets, domesticate animals, build better homes. Literally everything we do as modern humans started with twine, not stone tools. Story 114. Gunter's chain, invented in 1623 by an English priest. Each chain measured 22 yards, or 66 feet, and divided into 100 links, each 7.922 inches long. It was the dominant tool for land surveying in the English-speaking world for 300 years. It was the primary device used in the initial land survey of the USA and set up a grid used for land ownership to this day. Story 115. The cotton gin is certainly one of those things that caused a cascading series of events that were not predictable, including the U.S. Civil War eventually. Cotton farming was not all that profitable to begin with. When the cotton gin was invented and the cotton could be extracted cleanly, it caused a farming boom in the south of the U.S., where cotton grows well. This was very financially successful, which caused the need for more farm workers, which caused the need for more slaves, and we all know where that ended up. I could go on, but a much more qualified source than me has already written this up. Story 116. Velcro. It changed so many things, making stuff easier or fastening things that really could not be done without it. Story 117. The Haber-Bosch process and the Ostwald process together makes it possible to produce ammonium nitrate fertilizer out of air. This has drastically increased crop production per acre of land. Nearly 50 of the nitrogen found in human tissues originated from the Haber-Bosch process. Story 118. Double entry bookkeeping enabled keeping track of assets, debts, expenses, etc., so that large enterprises could grow and keep financially viable. Story 119. Combat roach traps are one of the most effective inventions mankind has ever come up with. Cockroaches were a huge problem in cities well into the 1980s, but that trap and the poison in it absolutely decimated cockroach populations. It's highly toxic. Cockroaches barf it up onto other roaches, die, and other roaches eat the dead and spread it even further. Story 120. The pump. People were able to get water wherever their source of income was, instead of walking perhaps miles each day for it. Pumps are also for gasoline-fueled engines, and so many things. Story 121. Analog photography. Exposing light onto photosensitive films and developing them into pictures led to the democratization of a new global industry in cameras. Later, this lucrative industry incentivized the invention of digital photography and videography that's in everyone's pocket today. More critically, the tools of analog photography led to the invention of lithography in the semiconductor manufacturing industry. The same process of exposing light, more accurately, UV radiation, onto a photosensitive film on a silicon wafer is still used to draw patterns at astonishing scales and accuracy. All the computing power of today is still based on these same chemical techniques. Story 122. Wi-Fi, it sort of randomly came into being without anyone really asking why or how. Now it's ubiquitous, and people forget that they have a Wi-Fi router at all. There's like a 5-year period in which Wi-Fi was actually a thing. Free Wi-Fi, signs at cafes everywhere, and now it's assumed to exist. Without Wi-Fi, no smartphone, no web-based services, barely any social media. Story 123. The carrying sling for babies doubled productivity, almost, for the times when babies couldn't be put down. Story 124. The Haber-Bosch process to produce artificial nitrogen fertilizer. Without it, we were on the path to mass starvation. We simply couldn't feed the growing population of the planet. Story 125. Cardboard. Hear me out here. A way to put things in containers not made of wood, so bulky, and print on them what they contain. Store them efficiently and move them around from one place to another. Then flatten them for the next time. Second vote is the ballpoint pen. Story 126. Blue LEDs. Despite earning a Nobel Prize, most people have no idea how difficult they were to develop and what a massive impact they've had on our lives. Story 127. The starter motor on car engines ushered in the ability for anybody to be able to start a car use it. Before that, you had to be strong, able-bodied, mostly limited to men. Story 128. The Haber-Bosch process produces ammonia out of hydrogen and nitrogen gas. The ammonia is then used as a fertilizer ingredient. It dramatically improved crop yields. That process was invented early in the 20th century. Without it, we could not feed the mouths of the 8.2 billion people that currently live on Earth, let alone 3 billion people. Humanity is literally dependent on it. Story 129. Electricity. It's assumed available, but no one appreciates its versatility. Heating, music, transportation, all happening because people figured out how to transmit electricity and store it. Story 130. The electric light in all its forms. We utterly take it for granted, but in reality, it completely transformed life for everyone within a few short years. Story 131. Soup. I submit that soup has saved the human race from extinction more than once. There's no other way to use a small chunk of protein to feed an entire family clan. I have a friend who is an anthropologist who is looking into this for me. He said it was a fascinating concept. Story 132. Fixing nitrogen with the Haber-Bosch process. Without fertilizer, half of all humans wouldn't exist right now. Story 133. Refrigerator. A lot of food poisoning and spoiled food avoided. WC with sewers and flushing water. A lot of diseases avoided. Story 134. Electromagnet. Without it, much of our electricity could not be generated or turned into mechanical energy. Story 135. Weber kettle grill. Absolutely changed the way a regular family was able to cook outdoors. The rest is history. Story 136. The cooking pot. You have fire and cook with stick, flat stones, maybe wet leather skin. Then suddenly you can slow cook grains and older meat. Story 137. Contact lens, or basically anything medically related that aids in everyday life, do not get enough credit. Story 138. Synthetic fertilizer. For better or worse, the synthetic production or ammonia fertilizer was massively important. Throughout history, civilizations have always been limited by food supply. Crops, in turn, are limited by the amount of nitrogen that receive. The Haber-Bosch process, which synthesizes nitrogen-rich ammonia, enabled an acceleration of crop productivity that doubled the amount of people we could reasonably feed from about 3 mil to over 6 mil in about 50 years. Story 139. Nobody's mentioned it yet, but the clock changed the world in ways it is hard to account for. From coordinating human activity at large scales to enabling the computer revolution, devices for keeping time are at the center of the modern world, but are largely invisible and ignored, except for when you want to know the time. Story 140. I'd add the automobile. This invention gets us to work. We travel for food, vacations, pleasure, and socialization. Where would we be without the car? Story 141. Color photography, which surprisingly was invented during the late 19th century, though it took several decades to perfect. Story 142. Grain elevator transformed the American ag economy into a global force by making cheaper, faster transport, and created the commodity market. Went from farmers selling their grain in individual loads to them selling to a warehouse essentially, and allowed them to sell by quality grade. Whole concept of trading and grain futures was enabled from them. Story 143. Alternating current, Nikola Tesla, Wi-Fi, Nikola Tesla radio, Nikola Tesla wireless transmission of power, Nikola Tesla fluorescent lights, Nikola Tesla VTOL, Nikola Tesla, and much, much more. Story 144. Hydraulics absolutely changed the world. Imagine life before machines could move the earth from under us and build the things around us. Story 145. The nail, invented sometime in the Bronze Age, completely transformed how structures were built, improved security and safety from animals, humans, and weather alike. Story 146. Lithium batteries. John B. Goodenough developed and contributed massively toward them. He unfortunately had to more or less sell over his rights patent. A world without lithium batteries more or less means everything needed to be replaced after charge was dead. He only made a few million over his lifetime alongside some Nobel Prizes. But you think about how much he could have made. Everyone has phones. Almost every device has one, and so much more. Story 147. Not quietly, but proximity fuses during WW2. Those things were 5 to 10 times more efficient than time or contact fuses, and is, in my opinion, one of the real game-changing inventions during WW2. Also ball bearings. Story 148. Thread, spun fibers. Some kid takes a bit of fur from the animal the family's having for dinner, twists it idly in their fingers. Look, it won't come apart if I twist it. And if I stop pulling on the ends, it twists itself. And then it stays together that way. Okay, yeah, sure, kid. That's cute. Eat your food. Don't play with it. Thousands of years later, look around you and try to imagine a world without fabric, where clothes, soft containers, everything else is made of animal skins or seaweed, or some other natural then, flat, flexible object, instead of thousands of tiny spun fibers. As for the doesn't get enough credit part of the question, I just went through the comments of this thread down to load more and didn't see one answer of or relating to spun fibers. Story 149. All of the radiologic sciences fields were invented over the past century. MRI and CT scanners came out in the mid-80s and have rapidly developed in technology just in the past 10-20 years. Non-invasive tests that take just a few minutes to an hour or so have drastically reduced mortality and the need to do more invasive tests to diagnose. Story 150. Forward-facing tables and chairs. I've no idea how much time they saved, but the ease of use was astronomical compared to what came before. Story 151. One of the first steam turbines, for function rather than novelty, was actually created to rotate a spit for cooking meats. Story 152. I'll say indoor plumbing is probably often cited for its convenience, but I'm guessing before you had a sink in your house, you didn't wash your hands after using the bathroom. A little hand washing has probably saved tons of lives. Story 153. String. Once you have string, you can use for all sorts of things. Weave clothing, make a bow, use it to make starting a fire easier, tie things together to make carrying them easier. The list goes on. Story 154. Automatic telephone switchboards. Automating telecommunications was the beginning of the information era. Story 155. Printing press. The ability to publish your ideas to thousands created a huge increase in discovery and inventions by others. Story 156. Quietly changing my world is my robotic vacuum cleaner and lawn mowers. Set them on automatic and job done. Story 157. Glass ribbon machine made the mass production of light bulbs possible. John Deere's invention of the self-scouring plow made it possible to cut the number of farmers in half. Story 158. Water chlorination, both for drinking water and sewage. It virtually wiped out cholera, typhoid, and dysentery in most developing regions. These diseases were responsible for millions of deaths per year. Children were particularly vulnerable. One study found that clean water was responsible for cutting 3/4 of infant mortality and nearly 2/3 of child mortality in the United States in the first 40 years of the 20th century. Story 159. The blue LED. Seriously, look it up. It was nearly impossible to make for a decade, while red and green were easy. Newsel Flesh. Every single electronic device that needs a screen uses red, blue, and green LEDs to make all the colors. Literally, we would not have any screens if one crazy guy did not dedicate 10 years inventing the blue LED. Story 160. Radio. The ability to transmit voices and data over long distances without wires has been both life-saving and life-changing. It has enabled rescues in remote areas, law enforcement communications in real time, communications for shipping while out at sea, communications between planes and the ground. Probably millions of lives saved through the use of radio telegraphy and voice. Radio is also the information technology that underlies the modern world. Cell phones, routers, and Wi-Fi satellites and space probes, GPS, all communicate via radio signal on different bands. RFID tags that track everything from packages to animals all work via radio signals. Radio also completely revolutionized entertainment, bringing live shows into people's homes for the first time. It was also the first streaming platform. For the first time in human history, people bought the device and all the information could be had at leisure. No need to buy individually packaged media. Total game changer. But we take it totally for granted that information and communication is instantaneously possible and available at any distance. Story 161. Centralized trash collection. Many parts of the world do not have trash collection, resulting in people either having to burn trash or just litter. Having a system wherein trash is collected in designated receptacles and safely removed to remote locations, even if that location is a landfill, vastly improves the quality of daily life. Story 162. Bag handles. People just carrying small awkward sacks everywhere, and then suddenly someone stitches two handles, and then, boom, carrying other chute at the same time got way easier. Story 163. String. Without string, we wouldn't have the wheel, clothing, thread, yarn, rope. The act of plying fibers all those millennia ago started something that can never be fully credited. Story 164. The Tim Harford podcast, 50 Inventions That Shaped the Modern Economy, is an excellent series about this exact topic. Story 165. Glass. Without glass, no computers, spectacles, cars, planes, trains, internet, email, radar, telescopes, aka knowledge of the universe, light bulbs, windows, watches, compasses, and all the things they helped bring about. More important than the wheel, IMO. Story 166. The machines that print processors using plasma and light. If those machines go kaput, eventually everybody goes down. Story 167. Clocks and alarm clocks. They aren't necessarily quiet, but what time it is and what day it is probably what rules your day. Story 168. Edison gets remembered for inventing the light bulb, but what really changed the world was the invention of the electric utility, so that the light bulb is more than just a laboratory curiosity. Story 169. Air conditioning. The amount of energy, fossil fuels, etc., consumed by air conditioning is humongous in every aspect, down to the cars we drive. A 1% increase in fuel consumption per car equipped with AC for the last 60 years is a world-changing amount. Story 170. Lithium-ion batteries. The entire mobile world is powered by them, and it's an irreplaceable part of our lives now. Story 171. The Transcontinental Railway. It forced what we now use as synchronized or standard time in the USA and on the planet. Story 172. Modern feminine hygiene products. And I state this as a man. Imagine what it was like before disposable stuff. Kleenex. Blow your nose into what? Disposable diapers. Love them or dislike them, they have an impact. Liquid hand soap. Listerine, whose inventor is responsible for modern hygiene. Story 173. Combine harvesters. Agriculture used to provide the vast up until the 1920s. A drastic societal change took place within a blink of an eye, even in human history. Story 174. Don't know if it's an invention, but the first person that threw potato in a fire rather than digging it out of the ground and eating it like an apple. Story 175. Not an invention, but a discovery by a Hungarian doctor called Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a physician and obstetrician in the mid-19th century. He worked at the Vienna General Hospital, where he observed that maternal mortality from childbed fever, puerperal fever, was much higher in the ward staffed by doctors and medical students than in the adjacent ward staffed by midwives. His breakthrough came when he realized that the doctors and students were often moving directly from performing autopsies, working with dead bodies, to examining women in the maternity ward without washing their hands. Semmelweis mandated that all physicians and medical students wash their hands with a chlorinated lime solution before examining patients. The mortality rate in his ward dropped dramatically. He basically discovered sterile. Story 176. The zipper quietly saved humanity from spending half our lives buttoning things. Without it, jeans would be impossible, and luggage would just be sad cloth boxes with trust issues. Honestly, it deserves a Nobel Prize right next to Control Z. Story 177. pots strong enough to boil water in, cold weather clothing, like Arctic fox hood linings, that probably helped to keep us alive over Neanderthals. Nixtamalization. Story 178. The elevator. Before that, buildings were only 6 stories. Cities would never be what they are without the elevator. Story 179. No one mentioned it yet, but the metal lathe. It started the Industrial Revolution. The first lathe was used to put exact marking on a cylindrical device, marking where to cut. It was invented by British engineer Henry Maudslay. Story 180. As someone who's deeply passionate about technology's transformative power, I'd argue the humble version control system, like Git, is an invention that quietly revolutionized collaborative innovation. Before Git, software development was like trying to build a complex machine where every team member could accidentally break each other's work. Now, it's a seamless, distributed ecosystem where developers worldwide can contribute, track changes, and experiment without fear of catastrophic setbacks. It's not just a technical tool. It's a paradigm shift in how we collectively create technology. Git democratized software development, allowing open-source contributions from anyone with internet access. Projects like Linux kernel demonstrate how this seemingly mundane invention has fundamentally reshaped technological collaboration. From my perspective as a developer who started by digitizing a local library's archives, Git represents the kind of intentional innovation I deeply respect, a solution that doesn't just solve a problem, but reimagines how problem-solving itself can work. Story 181. Ocean shipping container. It changed loading freight in nets into a hold to secure metal boxes on and under deck. It reduced the cost of imported and exported goods, making many goods affordable to the general public.